What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So the Omega Level Mutants series proved itself to be really popular. I mean, you guys really seem to like the idea of talking about Omega Level Mutants and beyond Omega Level Mutants and so on, but there's a problem with that series. All right, the first is that it confines us to mutants. We can't have a series called Omega Level Mutants and then talk about like the Incredible Hulk, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And so the other problem is that it confines us to Marvel Comics because again, we can't call a series Omega Level Mutants and then talk about the powers of Superman 1 million. And so we're gonna keep the title of those previous videos the same, but I'm gonna dip my toe in the waters of changing the title and calling it like the most powerful beings in comics or something like that. And in this video, we're gonna be talking about Doctor Strange. Now, those of you guys who are well-versed in the history of Doctor Strange know exactly what I'm gonna say, so bear with me for a second because there are a lot of people out there that don't know about the whole dichotomies between Doctor Strange the way he used to be and the way he is now. So, the old school Doctor Strange is referred to as classic Doctor Strange. The modern Doctor Strange is referred to as just that, modern Doctor Strange. Classic Doctor Strange is when he was at his most powerful. It was stupid how powerful he was. He was insane, the kind of feats that he was able to accomplish. And we'll get into some of those as we go through this video. But on the whole, regardless of, whether it's classic or whether it's modern Doctor Strange, his powers usually all derive from the same location. Now, there are a couple things that I do want to touch on here. For example, the first thing is what's called the Darkhold. Those of you guys who are currently watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Darkhold is a huge part of the story right now. It deals with Ghost Rider and so on and so forth. And of course, Robbie Reyes is saying things about how he sold his soul to the devil and so on. The Darkhold is basically just like a book of black magic. That's really all it is. It's just a book that deals strictly with black magic. Doctor Strange deals with white magic, the good stuff. He doesn't deal with the evil black magic stuff. And so the Darkhold is largely synonymous with a being named Chthon, which is one of the dark entities, one of the evil entities out there in the Marvel Universe. It's also been used by Mephisto from time to time. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people who are talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. right now, especially myself, are saying that we're gonna see the Darkhold, or I guess we're gonna see Chthon, or we're gonna see Mephisto. It's one of the other reasons why people are speculating about Sigourney Weaver being the main villain for the Defenders TV show on Netflix, that she's gonna play the role of like Mephisto or something along those lines, because Mephisto shows up as either a man or a woman, and he just exists to trick people into giving him his soul. So that's why it all kind of feeds back into, Robbie Reyes and Ghost Rider and Defenders and Darkhold and so on and so forth. Having said all that, let's jump into Doctor Strange, because that's what we're here for. So when it comes to Doctor Strange himself, he's not a mutant, all right? So his powers aren't part and parcel to himself. So he's not like Professor X, where Professor X had an X gene that activated and it granted him the power of telepathy. He's not like Cyclops, where his X gene activated and his eyes went from being normal eyes to being portals to a dimension made of energy that allows him to disperse that energy in the form of optic beams. Doctor Strange's powers are actually lent to him by other people, and that's something I'd like you to keep in mind, because over the course of this video, we will get into why it is that he lost his powers, why he was depowered, why they made him weaker than he was. The idea of powers being lent to him will be a major focus of that. But among the core attributes, among the core sources of the magic that he uses is really the crux of everything, which comes in the form of the Book of Vishanti. And I am 100% sure we are going to see this in the movie. If we don't, I will be severely disappointed. So, long ago, way back when, if we take an adventure back in time, there were basically the Elder Gods. And the Elder Gods were like the first gods on Earth. Something to keep in mind here is that in the Marvel pantheon of gods, you have the second generation of gods, which is like Odin, and that's where you get Zeus and stuff like that, Vishnu. That is the in Marvel Comics representation of the various gods that people think of right now when it comes to different religions. The Elder Gods were basically beings that went crazy with power. In response, the representation of Mother Earth, a woman named Gaia, basically summoned the sentience of the planet. That sentience destroyed all these Elder Gods and then flew off and merged with the sun. It sounds crazy. And it is crazy, but that's basically what happened with those. But while those Elder Gods were going crazy and they were, fighting each other and consuming each other and so on, one of them had basically taken off before that war started. And this god's name was Ashtur. And Ashtur took off to the furthest reaches of space and began exploring around, just wanting to learn about the universe. But Ashtur had also used, her involvement with being an Elder God to expand her own knowledge of magic. During this time, Ashtur came into contact with the god of an alien race named named Hogarth. And in response, the two of them realized that their ideas were one and the same, that they both just wanted to study magic and see how far they could push their knowledge. And so the two of them joined forces and then came back to Earth. But when they got here, Ashtur realized that all the elder gods had been destroyed, and so Ashtur, in response, gave birth to Agamotto. Now, Agamotto is, for all intents and purposes, the first Sorcerer Supreme. So for those of you guys who wonder where the lineage of that line, began at, it basically began at Agamotto. And the reason why I say Agamotto was effectively the first Sorcerer Supreme is because unlike Ashtur, unlike Hogarth, Agamotto had more of a hands-on approach when it came to people. It began going through and teaching various forms of magic, more or less taking on a student of its own, which handed those teachings down, creating the line of succession for the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme. But in addition to this more hands-on approach, Agamotto, Ashtur, and Hogarth began to record their knowledge of magic in a book called the Book of Ashanti. And so that's why this is more or less an encyclopedia of magic in Marvel Comics. That's where Doctor Strange derives all of his knowledge from. Now, there are also other places where Doctor Strange gets his magic. For example, around 1,000 years prior to the current day, there were a group of 8 gods called the Octessants, and they were eventually banished from Earth. But the idea was that they had all competed to see which one of them was going to be the strongest, which one of them had the most, had the greatest amount of power. But because they were banished from Earth, what they did is they created artifacts that were placed on Earth. And when the first of these artifacts was picked up, it would in turn create a trance in 7 other human beings around the world. They would go pick up these artifacts, and then they would each create their own army, and the armies would wage war against each other, and whoever won would be the representation of that particular god, and that god would have won the contest. It was called the Octessants. It's kind of a weird situation. One of these gods was a guy named Cyttorak. Now, Cyttorak may sound familiar to you all if you're familiar with the Juggernaut, and the reason why is because the artifact that he had placed on Earth was the Crimson Gem, which was picked up by Cain Marko, which began the Octessants, but Cain Marko used that Crimson Gem to become the Juggernaut. Now, what Doctor Strange uses are called the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak. It's not like the gem. It doesn't grant Doctor Strange incredible strength and momentum that can't be stopped. Instead, it basically binds people and they can't escape. This is just one of the things that they use. Another member of the Octessants was a guy named Watum, and Doctor Strange has what's called the Wand of Watum. This just shows you how all these different entities Doctor Strange borrows powers from or borrows magic from in some form or fashion. He has, for example, the Cloak of Levitation, which allows him to fly like 25 miles an hour or something like that. But Doctor Strange almost never really uses the Cloak of Levitation to fly, the reason being because he can just teleport, and that's one of the powers that he gets from the Book of Ashanti. But he also has different artifacts like the Eye of Agamotto, which allows him to see into everything. I mean, it allows him to see into other dimensions. It allows him to see everything that's going on in the entirety of the multiverse whenever it is that he happens to be looking into the eye. It's like a crystal ball for everything in existence. He also has what's called the Amulet of Agamotto, which protects him from black magic, and he's got a host of other things that go along with that. Now, in terms of his abilities, the things that he was capable of, because Marvel in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s was really just writing stories that were just interesting and people loved cosmic level stuff, the Book of Ashanti was effectively a license to let Doctor Strange do whatever he wanted to do. And that was literally it. The Book of Ashanti gave him the spell to do whatever he needed to do in any particular situation, regardless of what that situation was. That was one of the reasons why he was so powerful. So during the events of Infinity War, for example, as part of the tie-ins, Galactus had traveled to Earth to enlist the help of Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange said no, and Galactus said, "You're going to help me whether you want to or not," and the two of them fought, and Doctor Strange defeated him. In the end, Galactus had to threaten to destroy the world in order to get Doctor Strange to help him, and Doctor Strange agreed to do that. When Doctor Strange first met the Living Tribunal, which is a multiversal construct, it's second to the one above all in terms of power, the Living Tribunal bound Doctor Strange in a mystical prison of sorts, and Doctor Strange freed himself. Now, one of the things here to keep in mind is this does not mean that Doctor Strange is equal in power to the Living Tribunal. It just means he was able to escape the confines of the Living Tribunal. If the Living Tribunal decided to kill Doctor Strange, then he would be dead, and there's no two ways about it. That's just the way it goes. But that's the kind of power that Doctor Strange had. There was an instance where Doctor Strange wiped out a dimension because he didn't want it to exist anymore. I mean, Doctor Strange, as the classic Doctor Strange, was the pinnacle of power. I mean, he could time travel, he could see into the future, he could alter reality, he could wipe people from existence. I mean, he could do everything. He could literally do anything he wanted to. I mean, that's the only way I know how to say it. He was he was beyond the power of Franklin Richards in terms of the things that he could do, if that tells you anything. Franklin Richards, Mad Jim Jaspers, those guys, he was well beyond that. Mad Jim Jaspers was like a multiversal threat, although they never really explored the extent of that. Doctor Strange in his classic form was definitely a multiversal threat. He could have wiped out all existence across the multiverse if he so choose to, because I'm sure there was a spell somewhere that would let him do that. And so the problem with Doctor Strange's comics is it created the Superman complex. How do you beat a guy who can do anything? How do you beat a guy, for example, who stood against Adam Warlock when he had the Infinity Gauntlet? Yes, he did that. During the Infinity War storyline, Doctor Strange had to summon the totality of all of his power, every single artifact, every iota of magic, in order to stand toe-to-toe against Adam Warlock when he had the Infinity Gauntlet. It lasted for the blink of an eye, it was super fast, and it was only momentarily enough to, serve as a distraction, but he did that. Like, it's one of the most insane displays of magic. But because of the fact that Marvel just really couldn't write stories that centered on him that were compelling because he could do everything, it resulted in his comics being canceled constantly. They would write Doctor Strange comics, those comics would last for however long, and then they would be canceled. And so the result was that Marvel said, okay, fine, let's nerf him. Let's take away his powers, reduce his powers in scale. And so what happened is they created a story called The War of the Seven Spheres, I think. And this is when we learned that the power that Doctor Strange uses, the various magics that he uses, are not without consequence. He can't just use them forever without ever having to pay a price. Instead, they're effectively lent to him in the sense that while it's not really said in the beginning, somewhere along the line, those individuals who lend him this magic can come calling favors. And that's what happened. The Vishanti had basically reached out to Doctor Strange and said, hey, we have this war going on. We need you to fight on our behalf as our avatar, and it's probably gonna last a few millennia. And Doctor Strange said, no, I'm not gonna leave the Earth unprotected for a few millennia. And the Vishanti said, okay, fine, then we're taking away your access to your power. You're no longer going to be the Sorcerer Supreme. Now, because of this, you had like Brother Voodoo who basically took his spot, but Doctor Strange ended up coming back and becoming the Sorcerer Supreme again, but his power was far less than it had been. His connection wasn't nearly as strong. Now, there was an in-continuity reference to this, and I can't remember exactly how it was they explained it in terms of why his power was weaker than it was before. But the fact remains that it was Marvel basically making a way for Doctor Strange to be weak. It was making a way to reduce his power so that they could actually write some compelling stories with him. The problem is that even though he still is weaker than he used to be, he's still stupidly powerful in terms of things that he can do. Right now, in this moment, he's one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel universe just because of the spells that he can invoke and the kind of things that he can do. He can still time travel. He can still, alter reality. He can still manipulate the powers of others. He can still, he can steal the powers of others. He can negate the powers of others. I mean, it's crazy the kind of things that he can do right now. But again, that's more or less, what Doctor Strange is capable of. Back when he was classic Doctor Strange, he could do anything at any point in time, regardless of what it was. Right now in modern Doctor Strange, he can do almost anything. That's really the kind of level that we're talking about here. It gets really, like, once you start getting down to nuances, it's more or less, what aspects of reality can he warp and different things like that. It's just a level of power so extreme that it's almost pointless to say, here are the things that he can't do, because even if you run over the things that he can't do, the things that he can do still make him a multiversal threat. So it's kind of wild. But anyway, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explain and you guys enjoyed this video, then make sure you hit the sub button. If you guys enjoyed this as well, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below, because I'm kind of curious, what character should we do next on the, strongest characters or strongest, most powerful beings in comics? Marvel, DC, Valiant, Image, otherwise, pick a character. I'll go through the list and we'll make videos on them at some point or another. But in any event, we're gonna bring this to an end, and yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.